Good afternoon. For those of you that don't know, my name is Shanaaz Gokool, and I'm the CEO of Dying with Dignity Canada. I thank you all for tuning in today, this Monday afternoon, a very rainy Monday afternoon here in Toronto. I'm joined at the Dying with Dignity Canada offices by some of our staff, some of our donors, members, and volunteers in the office to share this news with all of you. This is a story that I share today with certain elements that we couldn't have made up if we tried. It's a story about perseverance, justice, and faith, and sometimes knowing that you're just on the right side of something. This is our story, and more specifically, it's a story about you. Our members, donors, and supporters who continue to believe in our human rights work, even when it sometimes felt that the odds were stacked against us. So I'm going to take you back in history a little bit to July of 2014 when I was first joining the organization as the Chief Operations Officer. I think my first day of work was the last week in July, and about 2 weeks prior, my predecessor, Wanda Morris, invited me into the office. She had some news to share. What Wanda told me at the time was that it was very likely that Dying with Dignity Canada was going to lose its charitable status, that we were subject to a political activities audit that was initiated by the former Conservative government, and she had heard word informally that this was likely. And she very graciously wanted to give me an opportunity to back out of the position because I was already gainfully employed at another organization. And so I thought about it for about half a second or so, because I was working at the time with Lead Now, a not-for-profit without charitable status, and I had worked in the past at Innocence Canada, another not-for-profit without charitable status. And so I knew that this work was so critical. I knew it would be hard, but I also knew that it could be done. And so I said, I'm good. And then we fast forward to January of 2015 when we received official word from the Canada Revenue Agency, the CRA, that we were indeed going to lose our charitable status. We were being annulled. On January 20th, 2015, we made that announcement to the media that we had been notified that we will lose our charitable status in March of that year. It was big news, and we were the first organization that had come out publicly announcing a negative outcome of these political activities audit. And it's important to know that at the time, there's two ways you can lose your charitable status. You can be revoked, you did something wrong, or you can be annulled. Oops, our bad, from the CRA. You never should have been a charity for 32 years. We're going to annul you now and correct our mistake. And then, amazingly, just a little over 2 weeks later, on February 6th, 2015, the Supreme Court of Canada, in a unanimous decision, the Carter decision, gave us a verdict that said that medical assistance in dying is now a constitutionally protected right. So what do? We had limited resources, and we could decide to fight the CRA, which would take hundreds of thousands of dollars with no guarantee of success, or we could take our small team and limited resources and fight for the best possible legislation for this country. We chose the latter. Now, in February of 2016, when I became the CEO, we were told a couple of things. 2016 was the first full year that we would go without having charitable status. And some people told us we wouldn't make it through the year. We'd run out of money. Some other people told us our work would be done after the federal legislation came into effect. Well, I think now we can all say that we have proved both of those assertions to be patently untrue. But it was hard. We finished the year in 2016 in the black. Nobody was more surprised and elated than I was, but it came at a cost. The first 6 months of that year, we only had 5 staff on board, and it was an intense year. It was like being in a pressure cooker as we tried to advocate for the best possible federal legislation, which we did not get, but we continue to work on. And then, by May of 2017, we became very concerned about our future. At that point, I was really looking at, along with our staff and our board, how many more months do we have left that we can keep the lights on? It's not a position that I envy for anyone and any organization that's going through that. These are grim times. And we found out in the late summer of 2017 that we would be beneficiaries of a multi-million-dollar gift by one of our dearest supporters, someone that I had a personal relationship with, Dave Jackson, who died in July of 2017 and left most of his estate to Dying with Dignity Canada. We announced that in June of this year, and Dave Jackson gave the country a gift that Dying with Dignity Canada would be around for the long haul in order to help protect people's human rights and support people in need. But then we had a question of sustainability. Could we continue on as our work in this area multiplied and became more complex and nuanced with the various issues that have arrived? So I'll take you back again to 2016 for just a minute. In May of 2016, when it became really clear that our work was not going to be over once the federal legislation passed in June, I received the go-ahead from the Dying with Dignity Canada board to reapply for charitable status, to do what some told us was going to be impossible to do. It was a lot of work because, you need to have basic information to give the Canada Revenue Agency, and at that time, we didn't even have a strategic plan. So I, along with the staff, devised what I now call a quasi-strategic / operational plan, which really identified what our work was going to look like over the coming years. We knew that there would be two elements of advocacy work, one related to the eligibility criteria, the unconstitutional and overly restrictive and discriminatory eligibility criteria in Bill C-14, and the other really related to people's access and having difficulties in accessing medical assistance in dying. We also knew our other two pillars of work would continue as they have for many, many years. Our personal support work for people, families, and that had become extended to people looking for help with finding independent witnesses, and also support for clinicians, and our ongoing work of education on advanced care planning, patient rights, and medical assistance in dying. As many of you know, my background is in human rights. I worked at Amnesty International for 5 years, and I knew that we would be able to rebrand ourselves as a human rights organization, and that human rights purposes were indeed charitable purposes for our organization. And it was the only way I could look at this issue when we're talking about choice, intolerable suffering, autonomy, and who has the say and the right to do what they want to do with their own bodies. So we drafted new human rights objects of incorporation for the organization, and they were accepted by our membership in May of 2017 at our annual general meeting. And then last November, we submitted, it was, I think, nearly 400 pages for our application for Canada Revenue Agency charitable registration. So the letter and then as many enclosures of all of our work, we wanted to make sure the Canada Revenue Agency saw our work and that we were transparent in our assertion that we were indeed a human rights organization. Well, I am thrilled to tell you today that Dying with Dignity Canada is a human rights charity, and that is retroactive from January of 2018 this year. So January 1st of 2018, if you have made a donation, if you joined as a member, you will get a tax receipt in early 2019. And so, all of the folks in the office are clapping and mooting, and I hope some of you are too. And I'm just going to say that one more time because it sounded so good to say it for the first time to all of you, that Dying with Dignity Canada is a human rights charity. Remarkable. So some of you may wonder what this means for our work, and I think it's a really important consideration. But make no mistake, defending human rights is charitable work, and the return of our charitable status sets the stage for Dying with Dignity to become an even stronger defender of Canadians' end-of-life rights. Moving forward, we will continue to raise a strong voice in defense of your right to choice, including medical assistance in dying, a legal human right in this country. We remain committed to speaking out about assisted dying rules that violate your rights and unfairly discriminate against far too many Canadians. For our part, we will continue to be a pillar of support and justice for those thousands of Canadians whose rights, as laid out in the Canadian Constitution and Charter of Rights and Freedoms, are on the line. This will not change. So we're going to participate in court challenges, and we'll ensure that our lawmakers at the federal and provincial legislators know that upholding people's charter rights for end of life and medical assistance in dying, these are all human rights. And we'll do everything possible to ensure that the unconstitutional eligibility criteria in Bill C-14 is struck from the law, that the arbitrary rules that discriminate against people because of their diagnosis or the precariousness of their medical condition or because of their age are fully addressed, and we have inclusive rules for assisted dying, that people don't have to choose between dying too early with the use of medical assistance in dying or losing the right altogether, and that people who are in publicly funded healthcare facilities, hospitals, hospices, and long-term care residences will be able to be treated with the dignity they deserve to be able to access, fully access, medical assistance in dying, regardless of the facility and regardless of what part of the country that they are in. Our purpose in this work, I remind you everyone, is indeed charitable. We're not asking for legislation. We're asking for people's rights to be upheld, and that indeed may cause changes in legislation, but our purpose is to support Canadians at the most vulnerable times of their lives. We will explore every existing legal and political option to make this a reality. With you on our side, we won't rest. So there's a lot of people that we need to thank for making this happen, and first and foremost, and the reason that we wanted to do this live stream with all of you, our donors, our members, and supporters, is so that you would hear that from us first. Before the media, before other people, you are the reason that we're still standing here. You believed in our work in the face of some incredible odds. With charitable status in hand, Dying with Dignity can now support and empower more Canadians than ever. We would not be in this position if it wasn't for the generosity, the vision, and the persistence of all of you. For decades, you believed that Canadians had a right to choice in the face of intolerable suffering, because you believed medical assistance in dying is now a right in Canada, and defending your charter rights is a charitable purpose according to the laws of our country. And of course, we want to thank the CRA, the Canada Revenue Agency, for recognizing Dying with Dignity Canada's human rights advocacy, our education, and our personal support programs are charitable in nature. Canadians will certainly benefit from this fair and just decision. We want to thank our board of directors, past and present, for their invaluable work in leading this organization into a new transformative era that upholds human rights at end of life. We also have a number of other key stakeholder groups who, if it wasn't for them, we wouldn't be here, and we thank them for all the work that they do supporting us. Our Patrons Advisory Council, our Disability Advisory Council, our Clinicians Advisory Council, our Legal Advisory Committee, and our community chapters from one end of the country to the other, who do so much education and grassroots supports all across the country. I also want to thank my colleagues at the Dying with Dignity Canada offices, Anya and Nino, who stayed on with us after we lost charitable status. Kelsey, who joined just before we lost charitable status and didn't know that was a possibility and still stayed with us. Corey, Deborah, Rachel, and Maureen, who joined after we were annulled. And to Laura, who bravely believed we could fundraise to do this critical work without charitable status. We want to thank our lawyers, Susan Manwaring and her team at Miller Thompson, for their leadership, experience, and commitment to our application. Susan, we couldn't have done this without your expertise, and your belief in this organization and our work as human rights work was invaluable, and I thank you so very much. I want to thank Richard W. Ivey, the chair of our Patrons Council, for believing in us and believing that these issues that we work on are indeed human rights issues. We also want to thank the consultation panel on the political activities of charities, appointed by the Minister of National Revenue in September of 2016. The panel was comprised of 5 people with broad experience in the charitable sector: Marlene Desboisbriand, Sherry Austin, Susan Manwaring, Kevin McCourt, and Pete Robinson. Thank you for shining a light and bringing forward progressive recommendations for how charities can participate in public and social policy development in this country. We want to thank Canada Without Poverty and Environmental Defence for their incredible work on the CRA political activities file. We all owe a debt of gratitude to Canada Without Poverty for taking on the austere rules in the income tax code related to charities and political activity at court and winning this past summer. And we want to thank Imagine Canada for taking a leadership role in the charities and nonprofit sector and advocating for charitable rules that allow social and civil society charities to advocate fully and fairly for all Canadians. Though this announcement represents a major victory for Canadians, we recognize that thousands of desperately suffering people still face cruel choices at end of life because their rights remain out of reach. We invite all Canadians to join us, to join Dying with Dignity Canada, and to seize this invaluable opportunity to empower vulnerable people in their time of greatest needs. I'm going to ask my staff to all come and gather around as I get into this last moment or two. And for those of us that were there in 2016, and for those of my colleagues that joined afterwards, you know, we often have this discussion about what happened in 2016 because it was a remarkable year and a real turning point for this organization. When assisted dying was legalized in 2016, Canadians came to us looking for information and support. People were looking for help. Doctors were looking for, training. They were looking for lawyers. There was a time when people could go to court, a 4-month period to access an assisted death before the federal legislation came into effect. Lawyers were looking for doctors. Everyone was looking for help. And it was remarkable to be the organization that stood out and said, call us. We don't know if we're going to be able to help, and in fact, we have a general policy of never promising to help, but we certainly do promise to try. And you made it possible for us to answer all of those calls. By stressing the importance of putting the person first, you transformed Dying with Dignity Canada into a beacon of justice and hope for Canadians whose rights are at risk. Because if we are truly to be person-centered in our work, that person who's looking for help, that person who is looking for relief of intolerable, unbearable suffering has to become our North Star. And if we follow them, they will all take us to where we need to be. So thank you for joining us this afternoon. This has been a project 2.5 years in the making, and it's really wonderful and fulfilling to be able to report all of this back to you today. It's really hard to predict what's going to come ahead and in the years ahead, but we all know now that in Canada, this organization is going to be around to support Canadians, to protect rights, and to ensure that everyone knows we are here and we are watching. So we look forward to all of the challenges and opportunities ahead, and we look forward to facing them with all of you at our side. Thank you so much.